Okay, welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, and TwinCitiesGeek.com. So we got right in the middle of summer right now, so we got a lot of big summer movies to cover. So today we're going to cover a few that came out last week. We're going to cover Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken, the new animated film from DreamWorks. We'll be covering Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the fifth Indiana Jones film. The first one, actually, not directed by Steven Spielberg. And we'll have an early review of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which is technically Mission Impossible 7. We'll review that as an early review as it is coming out next week. So we'll jump right into that. But before I do, just, standard, CTAs of, look at the websites that I'm at here. If you like early movie reviews like these, be sure to like, subscribe, and all that BS. Okay, jargon out of the way. Now let's get to the reviews here. I figure I'm deciding which one to start with first. I think I'll start with Ruby Gillman, because I think it might be I'm going by which one will probably not throw out my voice first. I'm hopeful that this one won't. Only because I don't have as much drive or enthusiasm for this one. Not that it's bad or anything. All right, let's get my notes up here. Make sure we're all set to go. Get the cast list, the notes. All right. And all right, got it all squared away here. Let's see, Ruby Gillman came out last weekend, although technically I did see it 2 weekends ago. Early screenings for kids movies usually end up being on Saturdays anyway. So let's see. Got that there. Okay. All right. And I think we're good to go. Okay, here we go with Ruby Gillman in 3, 2, 1. So, Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken, is the latest animated film from DreamWorks. And I wouldn't say that it's up there with their more notable stuff like Shrek and How to Train Your Dragon, which DreamWorks has been touting, hey, this is from the same studio that made these films. And I don't think it helps either that within the the new DreamWorks opening animation, they basically showcase all the stuff that they've worked on before, including Bad Guys from last year. So to look at all this, everything that's come before with DreamWorks and their resume and their pedigree, to have all that and then look at Ruby Gillman, it seems like a step down, even though not really. The thing is, when you look at a film like this, it looks like it's it might have been from a smaller studio, like an up and coming Illumination one, just because it has very simplified features, but it also has its own style, its own kind of like doodle aspect, and a very endearing nature to it, where even though it looks like a bit of a simplified world, the heart and the key stuff that make that film work is all present within it. So it's weird to kind of gauge it, because you feel like it's not quite matching up to DreamWorks to their standards, but it's still actually a really good film. So the film concerns Ruby Gillman, voiced by Lana Condor, and she's a girl who's grown up in a family of essentially sea monsters, but she's not quite sure which kind. She's just been told that she's been different and that she needs to blend in with the humans and not go to the ocean, because then she'll discover who she really is, which, as it turns out, is a Kraken. And that's not a major spoiler, because they talk about Krakens very early here. So Ruby, she abides by the wishes of her mother, Agatha, voiced by Toni Collette. And it's not easy for her. She lives in her mom wants her to stay away from the ocean, but they live in a seaside town, and all the major activities take place on water, so it's tough. She's still dealing with all the same problems that every teenager deals with, the social pressures at school, finding a date for the prom, asking out your crush, fairly familiar stuff for teenagers. And to the film's credit, like I love the world that they establish here of this seaside town. Like all the characters feel very well defined. Like they have like their interesting little personalities and shapes and designs. I love. I know a lot of people will look at this and they kind of see like like the like the simple shapes of like kind of the like the bean mouth and the oblong shapes and the stretchy arms, especially since she's part of like a race that does have like stretchy limbs where they can like bend them like noodle arms and stuff like that. I love the whole look of it. But then it becomes like a little it kind of loses a little bit of that flair once Ruby discovers that as a Kraken she can transform into a giant monster with lots of tentacles. And it's more cute, I think, than it is terrifying. Like it's definitely leaning in that leaning more like in the turning red area where it's like she looks like she's transformed into a monster, but it's actually pretty adorable the way that she looks even with all the tentacles and everything and the way everyone tries to hype her up as a monster. It doesn't look, she doesn't look too different from the way that she usually does. She's actually kind of adorable in like the bigger form. So you kind of feel for her. Like she wants to hide this monster side of herself, but she feels that she's not getting the whole story from Mom. So, in order to figure out more about her lineage and her powers and how to master them and be comfortable with them, she goes underwater and she visits her estranged grandma, played by Jane Fonda. And I will say that the one thing I kind of like about this film is that, like, some of the voice actors actually doing a really good job trying to get into like character here with like Lana Condor and Toni Collette. I think just kind of melt into their roles here. But Jane Fonda, it's just Jane Fonda. It's like that's pretty much what you hire her for, and like she's all right, but she's still it just feels like like she's more or less playing herself here, more or less because she's meant to be like the like the kind-hearted matriarch. She's like a typical grandma. Like even though there's a lot behind her history and she has a bit of frustration and bitterness with her daughter and that her granddaughter doesn't know her heritage, it feels like there should be more there, but she's surprisingly lenient and kind of gentle. She's like, I know she'd come back. She's way too passive about trying to communicate that there's a war going on between mermaids. And one of those mermaids happens to befriend Ruby. Her name is Chelsea, and she's voiced by Anne Murphy. And like I kind of blame the marketing for this because they want to like lay in thick to the fact that the mermaids are the villain in this film, which they are, but I feel like the best way to appreciate this film is that like years down the line a lot of people are going to love it a lot more just because they don't know about the mermaid marketing here, because it's not so much that Chelsea is a mermaid as the twist, but more or less her history that she has with the Krakens that does kind of become interesting. And within the context of the film, divorced from the marketing, it actually does make for a really good twist and makes Ruby question, who she can trust when so little has been divulged to her about the entire world. Now, having described the film, the one thing that a lot of people are going to recognize, like, okay, this seems a lot like Turning Red. Like, it looks like it's a womanhood allegory, and it very much is. Like, at one point, they pretty much just like outright state, the Krakens in the family, the only ones who can transform big are the women. So it's specifically a problem that the women have within this culture, and the men do not. The men just kind of stay in like the standard human sea monkey type form. I'm trying to find the best way to describe it. Basically like Krakens that could pass as humans, which and they showcase what happens when you get older by Sam Richardson voicing this comic relief character of Brill, who's just kind of an eccentric but very simple and very squat type of Kraken. So yeah, you have like that womanhood aspect, but then you also have like family issues of trust, and then you also have accepting who you are, and also learning to like bond together with family. There's so many themes here that like I like the idea of having them all work at the same time, because then the film doesn't become very simplistic, but the film also wants to be very very fast and very eccentric within like its it's very short runtime. So it feels like it wants to topple on a lot here. And the problem with that, with the speed of this film, is that it doesn't feel like there's a lot of moments to fully embrace and explore these themes. Like, it feels like, okay, here's our section for womanhood, and here's our section for social pressures, and here's one for being comfortable with yourself, here's one for panic attacks, here's one for family legacy, and here's one about the war going on underwater. And it's like, there's so much here, and it's like you wish that the film would just slow down a little bit as it keeps like slinging out like the slapstick of its characters and the modern vernacular of trying to establish the teenage lingo here, that it feels like you can't appreciate it. It's like you want this. I really wanted this film to slow down just so that I could, it could explore some of the themes that it sets up here. And I feel like that's a little bit of an issue, mostly because when you get into like the third act, when they have like the big reveal with Chelsea, I feel like it's a bit, it like there's a little bit of like a mixed message there, because it feels like there's a whole don't judge a book by its cover and be honest with yourself. And then you have like the deal with the mermaids where they're trying to steal this Triton to become the rulers of the ocean again, and it kind of like, no, it says like, yeah, do judge a book by its cover. We told you the mermaids were bad news, and hey, look at that, they're bad news. So I wasn't quite feeling the film on that level. And a lot of other aspects here, like they work okay, but they don't like become anything more than that. I think this is best personified by the casting of Sam Richardson as Brill, who is a uncle of Ruby, and Will Forte as like the crazy the crazy kind of like sea captain who's trying to seek out a Kraken and capture one. They pretty much play the roles you expect them to, much like Jane Fonda. They dig out like like the typical voice roles that you'd expect. So if you've seen anything with like Will Forte and Sam Richardson, the type of performances that they're going to deliver, and they're mostly just standard comedic backup. And there's a whole lot of other standard elements here with establishing its world and establishing like, the problems that a teenager would face, and building up the Krakens and the mermaids, that it's like it works. And like I was definitely like smiling a lot, but there was never a moment where it completely sucked me in. It always felt like it was in a rush to get to like the next thematic moment or the next key plot point, or the next just visually stunning moment, which, to the film's credit, it does look nice. I did enjoy looking at all the aspects of this town and the various characters here. That being said, some of the characters do fall to the wayside. Like, you have Ruby has a father and a brother, and they're just kind of like standard background noise. Like the father's an entrepreneur, and he loves his wife. He loves his wife deeply, and he has like his own little chip in a bottle business, and it's cute, it's adorable, but we don't get much more than that. And then you have Ruby's eccentric little brother who he just loves dodgeball, and that's kind of about it for his character, which is kind of sad, because like they're meant to kind of team up and help each other throughout the film, and they're still just kind of falling back on like the same things that they always do. Like, they're very much in like the back seat for this adventure. So I was a little bit torn, because like there was never like like for a film with lots of slapstick and comedy, there was never a moment where I got as big of a laugh as I did out of Turning Red. But I did really smile a lot. I did love like the plight of Ruby. I was just waiting for it to just like go like one extra mile to make me feel a little something more, and it just kind of, and it's not quite there. So like it's a good effort. I will say this, like if you really love Turning Red, I think this is like a good double feature to have with it if you want something along those same thematic lines. I also love how very like snappy the dialogue is. There was never a moment where it's like, okay, they're trying too hard to appeal to modern like tweens and Gen Z. It always felt like, at least from like the reactions of the other kids, like it always felt like it was talking more with them rather than down to them, and trying to say, hey, like, how do fine children. It never felt like it was trying to do that, but it never it never broke out of like that kind of like standard animation formula. Which is kind of sad because I really do like what the film was trying to do here, and it definitely gets an A for effort. I like what it's trying to say. I love its messages. I love the way that it's designed. It just needs that extra kick to make it work here. So yeah, as like a family matinee, I think it's a really good option because I think it's good for family viewing. I watched it with a bunch of kids. Like the kids really seem to love it too, and it's got some pretty good messages and just it's visually appealing. It's definitely not going to be like a DreamWorks classic, at least the way that I'm looking at it. I know it's too soon to tell right now, and a decade down the line, there's probably going to be a bunch of kids who grew up with this film and say, Ruby Gillman really, really solidified my childhood. There's probably going to be some kids who grew up like that. So, but as it stands, as from the film that I saw, like it's a good but not great DreamWorks animated film, especially when you consider the other films that they've worked on in the past. It's a good step forward. I would like to see them do more films like this, but it needs like that extra punch that stuff like How to Train Your Dragon had, or even stuff like The Bad Guys. The Bad Guys had like a little bit of that extra kick to it to make it like its own thing, and the way that it stands here, like it's a good film for DreamWorks. If this were like from a smaller studio, I'd say this is a great film. But knowing that DreamWorks has such like a rich resume behind them, Ruby Gillman is just it's good. It's good, but it's not great. So Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken. It's currently playing in theaters. I don't know how long it'll be there and there for because it's a small box office take, But yeah, it's through. I think DreamWorks is still through like Universal, so it'll probably be on like Peacock soon. Probably sooner rather than later. Kind of sad though. I do hope it finds a new life on home video because, like I said, it's a good pairing with Turning Red. All right. Okay. So let's move on to Indiana Jones. Let's get the notes up here. Indiana Jones is here. Use a whip with a fedora. There's probably some better lyrics someone could come up with after that song, Okay. Got all the notes here. Yep. There we go. All right. In 3, 2, 1. So, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is the 5th Indiana Jones film, and the first one we've got in over a decade. And it's weird because like this is like the first Indiana Jones film without Steven Spielberg as the director, and without dogging on the film too much, like it definitely kind of shows, only because like while watching this film, I feel like if I were to see like a treatment for this on paper, I would say, yes, this is an Indiana Jones film. That this is something that I would like to see. But selecting like director James Mangold, I think is a good choice. Like Mangold has done great films. Like I mean, I've loved his work on Logan and Ford v Ferrari. He definitely does know how to shoot action scenes and make you care about the people within them. So it's kind of it's very disappointing, I think, to say that that I wasn't quite feeling the same thrills that I usually get with Indiana Jones. And I feel I'm very conflicted about that because like I almost feel like a different kind of Indiana Jones film is being tried for here, but it doesn't quite hit all that well. Like I mean, I can see the wheels turning. I can see it trying, and I can see shades of like the Indiana Jones type of film that I love coming through here, and it's just, it wasn't hitting for me. And it's like it's one of those things that like it's a little bit hard to describe exactly. Like, I can't really quite pin down one thing specifically that didn't make it gel for me as much as the other Indiana Jones films did. Um, Other than the fact that it just didn't thrill me as much. So the premise this time is that now the story has kind of like, with the progression of time, Indiana Jones now exists in 1969. So Harrison Ford's a lot older. He's in a much different decade. He's struggling to adjust to changing times. And I'll be honest, on paper, I love this idea. I love the fact of having Indiana Jones specifically in 1969 because there's so much to play with. There's, there's civil rights, there's peace movements, there's conspiracies going about, there's the moon landing and stuff. There's so much to play with here. In the same way that, like with the last film, like Spielberg found ways to, have fun with like the 1950s and make that kind of work for Indiana Jones while also making it about as stylized as the previous entries were. And here, I'm not quite feeling it here, and that's mostly because I think that this film wants to be a much more stern Indiana Jones. Like they definitely want to make it a much more serious picture about grief and pathos. Because I like the idea of having this new development where Indiana Jones is a character who's kind of lost everything at this point. Like, he's very bitter about the past. Like, he's not sure that he can find a happy ending for himself in this life, and he's just kind of given up. And then into his life comes his goddaughter, Helena Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and she kind of like kickstarts his life a little bit because she's a thief. She's an international thief, and she wants to track down lots of interesting artifacts and sell them. So, of course, this immediately gets Indiana on the case because, like, for one, Shaw, he feels responsible for Shaw to look after her, but at the same time, Shaw is going to steal some valuable stuff that will go against Indy's credo of it should be in a museum. So they have a great conflict there, but the problem is that this is a film that's like, it's 2.5 hours, and I never felt like there was enough time that we spent with Ford and Waller-Bridge in these roles where they had like that perfect chemistry of like Indiana Jones being like the grump who doesn't want to go back to the past, and Helena Shaw who does want to dig up the past and wants to keep going into the future, because they both have like polar opposite personalities, which would be great for clashing. The problem with that dynamic, though, is that the film, it feels like it's in such a rush to get to like the big MacGuffin here of finding the Archimedes dial, which may or may not have the ability to turn back time. Great idea, but the problem is with their relationship and dynamic, it's all business. Like, even like the moment when kind of like when Shaw is kind of like scoping out Indy and trying to get a feel for him before she approaches him, the moment after that when she like kind of like sits in on one of his classes and then tracks him down to a bar, it's all business. Like, she gets in there and they're immediately kind of talking about like, who she is, she was the goddaughter and, looking for the Archimedes dial. Here's the information we got. Hey, let's go off on an adventure. And scenes like that make me think that this film might have come in at like maybe like 3 or 4 hours and then was told to be like chopped down here, because it feels like there should be more down moments here where we get to appreciate the dynamic between the two characters and see them play off each other. And instead, most of the picture, they're just talking about where to go next, where to get the dial, and not really commenting too much on Indy's life or Shaw's life or poking fun at it. And even moments that are set up that for that kind of like that great moment of like back and forth, especially like the first scene where Indy travels abroad and tracks her down to a criminal's den where she's holding an auction and Indy tries to interrupt it. There's some good potential there, and instead it just kind of like rushes into like the big chase and action sequences, which to be fair, I like the way that they're set up. Again, on paper, this works. Like, I love the scene where Indy takes out his whip, like, and then this whole room of international criminals just whip out guns on him. Wonderful moment, but at the same time, it's like, I like the idea of that scene, but then like the way it's timed and shot, it's just kind of like, this isn't bad, but I almost kind of feel like that there's something missing here. And it's one of those things where it's like, I thought back to how like Spielberg can shoot action scenes and how he always still kind of had it. Like even after Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, he worked on the Adventures of Tintin, and there's an amazing chase scene there. Like, the one where they're on motorcycles and there's a tank running about town. Just, it's immaculately shot. And a lot of these action scenes are kind of shot a little bit chaotically. Like the camera's all over the place and it's a little bit hard to tell where the characters are for a few shots. It's not like Mangold, like full Michael Bay and just rickety shaking the camera here. It's definitely held firm, especially for scenes where there's clearly a lot of visual effects going on here. But it's like they're good scenes, but for Indiana Jones, like it feels like they should be a little bit more stylized, like a little bit more, I was waiting for like to have that one scene where like in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where there's like the giant plume of smoke that comes up, and and that was for as much as people like to like bitch about the Indiana Jones getting in the fridge and like they nuke the fridge type scene, it does lead to a great shot, and I kept waiting for those great shots, and they're few and far between within the Dial of Destiny. Just because it feels like they're always getting to the next scene, getting to the next clue, getting closer to the Archimedes dial, like getting closer to the MacGuffin, even though the big thing that I love about Indiana Jones, it's not the MacGuffin. And it's like, that's the key thing. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey. It's about the fun stuff that goes on with trying to, find this fantastical item. So that by the time you actually do get to the fantastical item, it's not like, oh, finally, what's it going to do? It's like, okay, damn, what's going to happen next? So much other fun stuff has already happened. And there is some kind of cool stuff. Like there's a car chase, which is pretty good. I like the fact that Indy's kind of like jumping back and forth here. There's some neat stunts there. There's an underwater mission in which Indy encounters like a bunch of eels. So of course, there's relation to snakes there. You got that tomb aspect. And then of course you have like the classics of Indiana Jones and Shaw are just going through a temple trying to solve puzzles and avoid all like the deadly traps. Very par for the course Indiana Jones stuff here. Which is all right. It works. I'm not saying it's that divergent here. If anything, I feel like it's trying to be too close to like the Indiana Jones formula that I don't really feel like this more serious tale of Indiana Jones, having grief and trying to get over his darker past kind of comes through with that. Especially during one moment where Indiana Jones and Shaw have just escaped from some men who have killed an associate of Indy, and Shaw's all excited like, oh, we got away from the bad guys. Isn't that fun and exciting? And Indiana Jones just like, my friend just died. It's not time for fun or anything like that, even though that's kind of been like Indy's brand more or less. But and it almost feels like that scene should hit a little bit harder to kind of relate to how Jones wants to put this world behind him but can't quite do that. And this is where like the biggest conflict I think comes in with the villain of Voller, played by Mads Mikkelsen. Now, Mads Mikkelsen is a great actor for playing a villain. The problem is Mikkelsen's great for playing like a very intimidating and grounded, quietly sinister villain. He doesn't eat up as much scenery as as previous actors would do. Like they were always trying to be stern, but there always felt like a level to them where it was, where it was kind of like a little bit, I don't want to say silly, but like a little bit like campiness that was brought out within the characters. And Mikkelsen is just kind of playing it straight here. And to its credit, like, I mean, if you're going to hire Mads Mikkelsen, this is the type of tone that you take with that character. And I think for being placed in this role, it works for what you hire him for. But I kept waiting for like, some moment to pop with the villain where, like he gets where he's definitely a threat. I love the way that they establish him as being very violent and willing to step over other people, and kind of having this very mysterious allure to him, that by the fact that he's still around after all this time and how he's still tracking the same stuff that Indy is. But it never felt like, and I feel like this is another problem with like the action scenes too. It's like I never quite felt like there was that like that kind of like campy indie element to him where it kind of related to B movie villains. Like it feels like Mikkelsen's trying to play this Nazi character a little bit too straight. And that this also goes into what I was talking about with like the action is that usually in the Indiana Jones films there's like one or two deaths that are just so over the top and just so like violent, they catch you off guard and they're kind of exciting. And here there's not a lot of that. There's like, I mean, at one point, like the Nazis get like shot up by their own guns, so that's kind of exciting, but not all that shocking. Like there's another character who gets smacked by one of like the train stops, and there's a big sequence where characters are getting harpooned, which is not bad, but like you feel like these deaths could be a little bit more exaggerated. Like the last film we watched a guy get eaten up by ants. And you feel like there's got to be something more like that in this Indiana Jones film. And I feel like this is the problem with the Dial of Destiny. It's like it's a clash. Like it wants to be a serious and firm ending for Indiana Jones to give him kind of like the somber yet appreciative ending that he deserves. And also being a fun and exciting Indiana Jones adventure with all like the car chases and the excitement and the classic tone and the fun B-movie serial adventure style. And they two just beat each other, and it like they kind of go back and forth, like I mentioned in the scene between Ford and Phoebe Waller-Bridge, where there's a conflict of tones. It just like it doesn't quite hit the same way it does, especially when like another thing that made me think that this is like there's probably an extended cut is how they treat Antonio Banderas. Antonio Banderas shows up in this film as an acquaintance of Indy, but it's kind of just inexplicable. He's just kind of like there. It's like, oh yes, it's an old friend of Indy's who's going to help out on this adventure for a little bit. I don't know. It kind of had like that Murder, She Wrote aspect where it's just like, oh, this is another person Indy knows because Indy knows everybody. But it never felt like, again, it never felt like you got to spend enough time with that character to get to know him. Especially when you have a perfect comparison here. Like you have John Rhys Davies returning as Sallah, and like from Raiders, like you don't forget that character. He's memorable. He's got some great lines. He's got his own style, and and when he pops back into this film, he's barely in this film, but when he does pop back up, it's like oh yeah, it's Sallah, he's back. And then you get to Antonio Banderas' character of Ronaldo, and you're almost kind of like, wait, who is this? Oh right, that's Indy's pal. And you're almost kind of like, is this Antonio Banderas? Because they kind of just inexplicably introduce him, So I wish I could like this film more, because I like the idea on paper, but the direction just leaves a lot to be desired. Even with like like a lot of people say like the big reason to see this is that there is kind of like a big third act twist to when they do find the Dial of Archimedes, and they do find a way to activate it, and it leads to this. It leads to like the adventure taking on a new setting, which was exciting, and I like the way that it's set up, but compare this to like the reveals of like the Ark of the Covenant or like the Holy Grail or what the Crystal Skull revealed, and it's not bad. Like it definitely fits Indiana Jones, but there was never a moment where it's just kind of like big surprise. I guess like the biggest surprise is just like in the visually what is present here, but at the same time it's a visual that requires a lot of like VFX for it to come together. So like I said, it's one of those aspects where I was very much aware, like, okay, this feels more in line with the B movie nature that I love a lot in Indiana Jones. But at the same time, in that sequence, they're still trying to, have Indy try to find himself during this moment and make it a much more serious story about an old guy just trying to find some happiness in this world. And I kind of felt that way too. I was looking for like the joy that usually comes with an Indiana Jones film. I'm not saying that that it can't be serious, that it can't tackle this subject matter. But when you have the film being in such a conflict with like the serious manner and the B movie aspect, I don't really feel like it works that well, at least for me. And it's like, the way that it boils down to this, like, I know a lot of people have been saying they really do love the Dial of Destiny, like it might be like their new favorite, and I can see that. It's just there's something about the way that it's directed, and it's not just specifically the shots, it's not the tone, it's not even like the dialogue that's mounted up here. It's not even the fact that I don't feel like this film takes full advantage of the 1960s the same way the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull took advantage of the 1950s, but it just didn't gel with me. And the fact that it's 2.5 hours and it felt like it was just kind of like going through the typical motions of an Indiana Jones film, it just became frustrating. It just became so frustrating after a while. It's just like it's not working here. It's not that this isn't a good idea, and it's definitely not the cast. I love what they're doing with these roles. It just feels like we're skipping by so much of like the great stuff in Indiana Jones and kind of like missing the forest for the trees. Like it's like they're focusing more on the destination than appreciating the journey, which you would feel like would be like a pretty important aspect to stress for the story about Jones kind of like looking back on his legacy and like trying to find some comfort in that, especially with like that great opening sequence on like the train where they establish the Archimedes dial. They do a little bit of de-aging on Harrison Ford. Despite that, with the visual effects, I actually really do like that scene. That feels like classic Indiana Jones here. But what proceeds after that, I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm waiting for that same sensation to come back here. And it really didn't. Especially when you have a film with Toby Jones, who's another friend of Indy within this narrative. And I kept waiting for him to like just like anytime Toby Jones shows up in a film, like like something bizarre is going to go down, and unfortunately it kind of goes down before he becomes like more of a key player in it. He's a good addition. Everyone I think is doing the best with the material they're given here. But yeah, like as it stands in terms of being like an Indiana Jones film, it just doesn't work. It just didn't work for me. Like, as a standard adventure film, this wasn't Indiana Jones. So, like, this is pretty good. It's a pretty good adventure film. But knowing everything about the franchise, this is sadly the weakest entry. And I don't say that as, like, I don't think they're going to go with more Indiana Jones, at least with Harrison Ford at this point. That I don't think, like, it's lost its way. It's just that I'm not looking at this like, this is not an Indiana Jones film. It is. It just didn't work for me. It's just it's definitely like the dullest Indiana Jones film that I couldn't quite get behind, just because it's going through the motions. Sadly, wish I could love it more. So Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, currently playing in theaters right now. So we got a comment here. From Suck says, that's the weird thing about a lot of these blockbuster legacy movies is that they never really feel like they're getting into the details of characters, yet the movies are still over 2 hours long. Yeah, like that's always kind of been a problem. I always felt like, when you're, especially like, when you're trying to make blockbusters, like you gotta bring them in at like a certain time, which is, it's both a hindrance and, like you kind of understand it too, because like, like my mindset is like, no good film is no good film is too long and no bad film is short enough. But if you're making a blockbuster, you pretty much like, it feels like 2.5 hours is the limit unless you for sure know that everyone is going to go see that film, because like, 3-hour films, they don't get as many screenings, they don't get as much box office because of that, and they turn out to be disappointing. So yeah, and people say like, oh well, Avengers Endgame, that was 3 hours, but yeah, it was 3 hours and it did make a lot of money and broke box office records, but it was also the end of a cliffhanger to a film franchise that everyone has seen, and also you had Disney twisting the arms of theaters in order for them to get to show as many screenings of the film as possible. So it's very much like a manipulated thing. So blockbusters would rather not spend that extra money, rather not go that far, and just keep it 2 hours or 2.5 hours, But yeah, like the way I would not be surprised if there's like an hour's worth of footage just lying around. They're just like, just trim out the character moments. Just put in the action scenes, you know? Okay. So let's see. We'll get to the last big film here. It's an early review. Check my notes quick here. Make sure I don't give any major spoilers. Also, what a title. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Even though technically the full title would be Mission Impossible 7 Dead Reckoning Part 1. But what would that make like Part 2? Just like make it Mission Impossible 7.5? Half of 7. That's what it is. It's one of those things because like, oh, it's all one movie. It's like, no, it's one long narrative. That's the thing. Okay. Looking through my notes here. Okay. All right. Here we go. Review of a film coming out next week. In 3, 2, 1. So, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is the 7th Mission Impossible film, and after Mission Impossible Fallout, I feel like that's a really tough act to follow, just because Fallout has been, like, my favorite Mission Impossible film by far. Like, the stunts, what it sets up, the way that it's shot, it's just immaculate, and to follow that up, I feel like is really tough, especially for, you know, having like a two-parter here. So it feels like Mission Impossible really has to up the ante here. And in terms of, you know, following up from that film, I feel like this first part of Dead Reckoning actually does a pretty good job. Like, I don't feel like it's as, like, great as, like, Fallout, which was, like, you know, Fallout was just, like, a perfect blend of the spy thriller aspects, and the action and the stunts were just so perfect. And Dead Reckoning, honestly, is it's very close, if not in the same ballpark as Fallout. Just because like it has the same amount of stakes, it has the great over the top stunts that you've come to expect from Tom Cruise. And it's so fast paced. Like that's one thing I was worried about. This film runs over 2.5 hours long, and it keeps up the pace that you expect with the Mission Impossible film, where you're always guessing, always looking forward to the next scene, always curious to see what's around the next corner, who's going to pull off the mask, who's going to infiltrate, and what's going to go on in the next mission, and what could go awry, which it usually does. Because the thing is, like, the Mission Impossible films, they're all pretty much like the same type of story. You know, the world is under a new threat by a terrorist organization, and Ethan Hunt, played by Tom Cruise, has to once again infiltrate with his team to track down a bunch of people across the world and steal back a MacGuffin to prevent the world from blowing up, much like in Fallout. Although I will say, Dead Reckoning is a little bit more interesting for the fact that in this entry, they're trying to stop a weapon that has become sentient. It's not like a sentient gun or anything. It's basically just an AI that might be able to infiltrate every network in the world, could destroy intelligence, and threaten to wipe out humanity. Much in the same way that the other terrorist organizations and other Mission Impossible entries have tried to do. So, standard type of stuff here, you know, feels like stuff that Ethan should be used to, and of course he's given another villain who has ties to him. In this case, he's facing off against a villain called Gabriel, played by Isai Morales. And of course, he has history with Ethan. You know, he's more or less responsible for leading Ethan into this life of secrecy and working within intelligence. And Gabriel is also big on kind of having these kind of like, you know, like the jigsaw killer type of traps, or just like, you know, decide who are you going to save in this scenario, and you know, like you can't save everyone, and is so highly calculative about that. I love the fact that that Gabriel is more or less acting as like this disciple for like this artificial intelligence, and is kind of and basically kind of thinks of himself as kind of like almost kind of like as a clairvoyant, is just like, I have seen what's going to happen in the future. Just by the fact that I've used like math and all these calculations have come to be. And it's like, thank goodness the film doesn't lean too hard into that, mostly because like it does do a good job setting up the thematic elements of Ethan wanting to push people away to save them, but also realizing that, you know, he can't quite do that. You know, there's so many points where you're just like, guys, you got to get away from me. I'm bad news. If you're in my line of work, the bad guys are going to come after you. And of course, Ethan's cohorts and, you know, love interests and, you know, people he's worked for in the past and those who've stuck up for him are just going to be like, no, we're along for the adventure, even though we're probably going to get killed. But hey, you know, we're saving the world. So you have like the familiar characters come back here. Ving Rhames, of course, is Luther, the computer technician, and Simon Pegg went back as Benji, the technical technician. So they do their standard stuff, you know. Ving Rhames will hack into security cameras, and Simon Pegg will, you know, try to like disarm bombs and like get like, you know, the right coordinates for where to go. Rebecca Ferguson comes back as Ilsa Faust, in which, like, you know, Ethan Hunt is very much concerned, like, you know, I gotta shove Ilsa far away from this as possible. And of course, you know, he can't do that because Ilsa can't stay away. Even there's even one point in this film where kind of like Ethan Hunt realizes how deep he is in this, where like he doesn't have control of the situation, that he shoves everyone away. And of course, they all come back immediately. It's like boomerangs. You know, he throws them, tries to get them out, tries to take on this mission by himself, and they just keep coming back. It's just like, you guys are like pennies, bad pennies. You just keep coming back to me, you know? So there's also a lot of parties involved here in terms of the big MacGuffin here, which is that the artificial intelligence is controlled by two keys that are being sought. They were thought to have been lost, but they're somewhere else in the world, and dangerous people want them. So this leads to Cruz gaining another ally, in which he runs into a thief called Grace, played by Haley Atwell. And they hit it up pretty well. I like the way that they're kind of like, you know, they run across each other. They cross paths, and they're very like quick on the dialogue. Like they're snappy. They're in the moment. They realize they're in a public place and that they're being tracked and bad people are after them. And the IMF is keeping tabs on Ethan Hunt, and that he's got to basically escape from everyone. So the fact that they are able to team up amid, you know, the fact that Grace is still a thief and she's trying to get away from Ethan, they make a good pair. I liked watching them kind of like team up, especially since, you know, Ethan wants to push Ilsa as far back into the background as possible here, despite the fact that she keeps coming back. I also like the fact that they bring back Ilana, or the White Widow from the previous film, played by Vanessa Kirby, who also plays another key player who wants that key. So there's multiple bad guys that play here. Of course, there's people working within Central Intelligence who are also bad news. So I doubt this is like even like big spoilers at this point, because this is pretty much the standard formula for a Mission Impossible film. And on that level, in terms of the way that the film is directed, I love the way that it proceeds. Like, it's very quick. The dialogue is snappy. Even though, like, there are so many areas where I feel like the dialogue, especially for dealing with a rogue artificial intelligence, could just go off on like the simple platitudes for this type of thriller. And it comes close to like making the dialogue a little too simple. But before it could go off on like a platitude, it would quickly jump into like the next interesting twist that's coming from this, that's coming from this material. So there's always something happening, and I love how even when like there's scenes where we're not getting the cool stunts and action scenes, you're always guessing about, you know, who's gonna fight first, who's gonna get shot, who's gonna get killed, who's in disguise. What's going on here? That brilliant formula that makes Mission Impossible work so well, and it's still kicking here. It still works. I will say this though, like the one thing that kind of threw me off with this film is how silly it gets at times, And I don't mean like silly and like the characters like constantly trying to crack jokes. I'm referring more to the stunts themselves, which are kind of framed as almost too slapsticky. Like at one point, Ethan has to make this like daring entrance as quick as possible in order to save someone, and he takes out two bad guys with just dumb luck. Like it's like the way that he takes them out is purely by accident of like the gravity and the shifting forces of the area that he's entering, where it's like it's almost kind of like Pink Panthers, just kind of like get like, wow, I didn't even mean to do that, I just accidentally knocked these guys out. And there's another scene in particular where there's a car chase, and it's a car chase with Ethan and Grace, and the way that it proceeds, like there's some ridiculous moments where it feels like in order to kind of like stall a bit or give like the bad guys a chance to catch up, some ridiculous things will go wrong. And I mean, that's kind of been like the Mission Impossible, setup for a lot of these scenes. It's like they have a mission set up and they have like a plan, but then the plan goes awry, so then they have to improvise. Here, so much goes wrong within the car chase that it's honestly just, it's ridiculous at certain points. Like you just can't help but laugh at it, especially for the fact that especially for like the fact that like the big car chase sequence here, it involves a yellow Fiat, and it involves Ethan and Grace in handcuffs, and it's just the way that it's played up as for like the silliness. It just made me think of Lupin the Third. I know this probably wasn't intentional and was probably mistaken, but when you have characters fiddling with handcuffs and like they're making ridiculous moves in a Fiat and just driving ridiculously all around the city, it just makes you think of Lupin. I mean, like I'm not saying that like every film that has a Fiat in it is a Lupin the Third reference. It's just it has that silly tone where you kind of get that. Outside of that, though, like aside from just like the daring entrance and the car chase, this film actually gets pretty stern with trying to stress the seriousness of the situation here, which you want. I mean, for being a two-parter, that feels like it's more or less going to be like the franchise finale here, considering how old Tom Cruise is getting. You want to feel like there's weight here, and I love the fact that part one, even though it's very fast paced and it's trying to be quick and have as many twists and excitement as possible, it does feel like it's taking its time to set up the danger here, to make you care about Ethan's plight, to understand the situation, and to make you invested in the MacGuffin. Like even though it's fairly simple here, like this entry is mostly just about getting the keys to like the big doomsday device, and then like the next entry is gonna focus more on like another MacGuffin. It makes you care about it because like the MacGuffin is unique. It's constantly changing. Characters are second guessing what it will do throughout this. Like, because in the other films, it's just like the characters are gonna get nukes and they're gonna blow stuff up. Like, what they're gonna do with it. Here, it's kind of interesting because like you don't know what's gonna happen, and that's the intriguing thing, is that when Central Intelligence actually does look at what this entity is doing and how it's just kind of like showing off that it could do whatever it wants, like that's very fascinating and very, very frightening as well, because like, here's Central Intelligence basically being like, God, if this thing can get into anything, what are we gonna do? So it's like, yeah, like there is like some weight to it where you're concerned about where all this is going. But of course, I know that for a lot of people, like, okay, this is mostly just gonna sound like fluff with everything I've talked about. What about the stunts and the action sequences? And yes, they are still cool. That big scene that Tom Cruise has been promoting, where he jumps off a cliff on a motorcycle and unleashes a parachute while trying to catch a train. Yes, that scene looks amazing. It's beautifully shot. The camera holds. You get to see all the great stuff there. It's still a lot of fun. It's exciting, especially when you watch it in like the big Dolby or IMAX cinema, and just watching that big expansive area that Tom Cruise just descends into. That's just good filmmaking. It's exciting. It's great to look at, and there's tension with it. You care about where the scene is going, and it doesn't just feel like, oh, here's the set piece. Like, there is a reason that Tom Cruise needs to jump off at this specific point to get to this specific location. So it's a story that's like constantly moving and still has great stunts like that, especially the car chases, the fight scenes. There's a great opening shootout in this film. That just like it hits you hard, mostly just because like the sound editing in that scene is just immaculate for utilizing it utilizes like environmental elements and tries to make the gun sound, big and terrifying, and it works so well. That's basically the way that I guess I'd describe most of them. It's just that so many scenes punch so hard, but if you've watched the other Mission Impossible films, you know what to expect. You know that it's coming. You know what's happening here. I will say this though, I really did like the addition of I'm gonna mispronounce her name here, so sorry, but her name is the actress name is Pom Clementikeef. I believe I'm pronouncing it. She plays a French assassin called Paris, who's mostly mute. She dresses in white, and she's a great addition. She has that kind of like quiet, terrifying presence to her that you just know she's gonna get into a knockdown, drag out fight with Ethan. And there's a great scene where she corners him in an alley, and they just have at it. And I gotta admit, like for as much as like the cam work is pretty smooth in a lot of the action scenes, I did like the fact that the camera was getting in pretty close within like this alley setting, and how it was a little bit rickety because it feels like it's almost impossible to shoot in such a tight location without getting a little bit clever with like the camera tricks there. But yeah, that scene just works. In addition to all the stunts and the surprises, it keeps you guessing throughout, and it's genuinely exciting. So I doubt this is news for anyone who has seen the other Mission Impossible films, but this is definitely a must see. It's definitely high up there. Like and this is coming from someone who was very underwhelmed by Mission Impossible 3. And Mission Impossible 5, Rogue Nation. Those films kind of felt just like they weren't as bad as like Mission Impossible 2, which was kind of all over the place. They just felt par for the course. And this is definitely high up there. It's very close to reaching the levels of Mission Impossible Fallout. In terms of like the story that it sets up and the stunts and the action scenes that it has. I don't even want to like I want to talk a whole bunch about like the big climax on the train, but it would spoil too much here, and I feel like there's words can't quite do justice describing just how intense and exciting it is for like the final few minutes of this film, and the fact that it ends as a part 1 and you're excited to see what happens in part 2. So much like Across the Spider-Verse later this year when it ended on a part 1 and you're just like, oh man, there's more of that coming. Man, I'm excited. So yeah, Dead Reckoning is another fantastic Mission Impossible film, and I absolutely cannot wait for part 2. So yeah, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 will be playing in theaters everywhere on July 12th, I believe. So that's next Wednesday. So be sure to check it out. See it in the biggest theater you can. You will not regret it. Hey, I think I did a good job not doing any major spoilers there. It's honestly it's a little bit hard to talk about. It's just one of those like visually beautiful films. It's like John Wick. It's like, yeah, I can talk about like the aspects of like hierarchy and stuff like that, and Wick's whole world is interesting, but the bulk of it is just gonna be, oh man, this scene looks cool, and this scene looks cool, and this scene looks cool, and they're all immaculately set up. So yeah, I will say this. I did go a little bit lenient on the film by not saying that compared, it's not as well shot as Fallout. Like there are remarkable shots in Fallout just for like the way they're set up and the lighting, that just it makes your eyes pop. And there weren't as many scenes like that in Dead Reckoning, which honestly it's okay. I feel like it's trying to be a little bit of a different film here, and even though it's by the same director. But yeah, it still works. There's still like, I mean, just like the action and the twists, they're way more than in Fallout. Which I know, like, how do you top like the wolf blitzer scene in Mission Impossible Fallout? But they do it. Another fun and exciting film. All right, so let's play out. Let's get some play out music here. Okay. So let's go through everything that we reviewed here today. We reviewed Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken. A good, but not great, DreamWorks animated film about a teenager who discovers that she's a Kraken and has to come to terms with herself and how it relates to womanhood. So yeah, very much in the same league, in the same thematic realm as Turning Red, and I would say it's actually a good double feature. You want to pair up Turning Red and Ruby Gillman. We also reviewed Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which is a good Indiana Jones film on paper, but James Mangold's direction left a little bit to be desired here. It's definitely, I feel like, the weakest of the Indiana Jones films, even though it does have so much of the DNA that I've come to love from Indiana Jones. And then finally reviewed Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Another fantastic entry in the Mission Impossible saga. Great stunts, great twists, exciting, and don't let the running time fool you. It does not meander around and pad out its runtime. It will breeze by fast. I had a lot of fun with that film. It's very close to being on the same level as Mission Impossible Fallout. And that's like the top bar of the series for me. So yeah. As if you needed another reason to go see it. If you've seen the other Mission Impossible films, you know. When you know, you know. Right? So there you go. Plenty of great recommendations for this week. Yeah, go see Ruby Gillman if you still can, and go see Mission Impossible next Wednesday. And see Indiana Jones 5 if you like. Go ahead. I did nothing for me, but I'm not your dad. Go watch it if you like. So let's play it a little bit here. If you liked the reviews you saw here, be sure to like this video if you'd like more early reviews like we did with Dead Reckoning. Be sure to subscribe to stay updated on the latest in movie reviews as well as essays that I'm currently writing. I also have a Patreon you can check out in my profile, in which I am writing movie-related books, which I'm uploading chapters as I'm writing them there, and you can also get them, also send them to you when I'm done with that. So there you go. You can also read my reviews at, of course, moviesmark.com, filminquiry.com, and twincitiesgeek.com. They're all over the place. Plenty of places to look. So yeah. So what do we got coming up on the horizon? Well, of course, we're going to be dead in the middle of July when I return in 2 weeks. And what's playing then? Of course, we got Barbie and we got Oppenheimer. The two big films everyone's been looking forward to. We got a Christopher Nolan film about the atom bomb, and we have a Greta Gerwig film about an iconic toy. And it's going to be bloodbath at the box office. So I'm going to make sure that we'll get a review of both. I don't know if I have a date. I don't know if I have the screening for Barbie confirmed, but I do have Oppenheimer I do have confirmed at this point. So we'll definitely have a review of Oppenheimer in 2 weeks. And probably a few other smaller films. I don't usually get to smaller films just because I try not to let these streams go on for too long, but what are you gonna do? Alright, so if you just tuned into the stream, you can play back the footage, or if not, I will have the reviews up later this week. So be sure to like and subscribe if you want more cool movie reviews done early. And yeah, I will catch you all next time. So have a great summer.